Hello folks, Robin here at Toadstool Tarot. We're coming up on the end of 2020. I've had my channel for about a year and a half, and I haven't done a channel intro yet. And so I thought I would reach out to everybody to see if they had any questions they'd like me to answer. So I've compiled a few. I'll give you a rundown to know something about me. First of all, most everything that you might want to know, you can find out about me on my Wikipedia page under Robin Crutchfield. I've made music, and all my music you can find on YouTube or iTunes under either Robin Crutchfield for my solo work, Dark Day for my band work, or there's a couple of tracks with DNA, which was my first band. I was born in Ohio. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I moved to New York City in the mid-1970s. I came here because I was interested in art. I was studying art in Pennsylvania at a wonderful little community college in Bucks County, and then I discovered minimalism, conceptual art, and performance art, and through a couple of magazines I was reading, I found that there was a thriving movement of that in New York City and decided I wanted to be part of it. So that's the main reason I moved to New York, to be part of the performance art scene, which I was. I came here and did a few performances that got coverage in local papers and magazines, and magazines from Canada, and one from the UK, I believe. And then there was a kind of a shift in about the mid to late 70s. A lot of fellow artists were transitioning from art into pop rock music. The punk music movement was going on in England and here, and change. There was a sort of a rebellion here into kind of an anti-punk movement called No Wave, and I was part of that at the beginnings. There were a small handful of bands, and 4 of them were chosen for a compilation album by Brian Eno. So I was in one of the 4 bands, DNA, along with Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, the Contortions, and Mars, and the 4 of us recorded tracks for an album called No New York, which came out on an affiliate of Island Records called Antilles, which you may be able to still find. It became sort of infamous and led to a lot of generations of do-it-yourself bands and artists making music or making noise, depending on how you look at it, for years to follow. I continued making art, not so much. The art scene kind of shifted, and I started writing, and I was doing performance pieces with the written spoken word, and went through a number of phases. Was part of a collaborative drag troupe in the mid-90s that performed at the Roxy nightclub. what else did I do? I self-published a book of short fairy tales that were therapeutic renderings of things that I was going through. It's called 11 Fairy Tales by R.L. Crutchfield. You can order copies at lulu.com. I also self-published a book of my line drawings, and recently, since I started my tarot review channel, I created 2 tarot decks, a majors only deck and a full 78 card pip deck. Those are the Open Face Tarot and the Eyes Wide Tarot. They're both available through makeplayingcards.com. I've been reviewing tarot decks for, like I said, since my channel started, and all of them, I don't know how many there are. They're all on there. You can watch the reviews. So I'm trying to think. I guess that sort of catches you up on my life for the most part. So let's get to some of these questions. It'd be amazing to hear your experiences back in the 70s when No Wave was at its peak, playing shows alongside the 4 bands I mentioned. I'd be incredibly intrigued to hear anything you have to say about the topic. Thanks. Don't know much to say about it, except it was a very experimental time musically. It was a lot of people that really didn't have any training, didn't know how to play instruments, and they were just kind of finding their way and experimenting. There was also a lot of cross-pollination between members of different bands and offshoots of various bands and projects. So it was a very interesting time. New York was a real mess. I mean, buildings were falling down everywhere, and it was just like, looked bombed out and in disarray. There was not much to do, and so we all just kind of dove into, making art and music and film. And I'd also done a couple of films. I was in Amos Poe's film The Foreigner, and I made a few short art films that were purchased a few years ago by the Museum of Modern Art for their film archive when they did a retrospective on Club 80 St. Mark's, which was a venue that thrived in New York in the late 70s and early 80s, alongside places like CBGB's, Max's Kansas City, the Pyramid Lounge, and a few small handful of other places. Can't think of any particular stories about my time with the bands. I really never really liked performing on stage live. I was always extremely self-conscious. I did love working in the studio. I like building things from a minimalist point of view, like a maximum of outcome from a minimum of input. Lots of layering techniques and repetitive cyclical layering of melodies and syncopated rhythms. That's kind of my thing. In the near the end of the 90s, I went from being keyboard oriented in my music to casting aside electronic music and instruments in favor of acoustic instruments, and I started collecting rattles, bells, and drums, small harps, lyres, and psalteries, and thumb pianos, things like that. Kind of because one of my earliest influences during the hippie movement was the Incredible String Band, and I had never lost my love for their music, even though it had veered off in other directions, but it sort of came full circle back to them during the 2000 aughts, and when there was a resurgence with something called the weird WYRD, Weird Folk movement, and that's when I went from doing Dark Day electronic releases to Robin Crutchfield acoustic, sort of folk, very otherworld kind of soundscapes. Anyway, enough about that. One last thing was, what was the inspiration behind the album cover to your Dark Day album Window? Oh, during the early Dark Day and DNA period, I was working in a bookstore, and they had cheap used books on carts outside, and I tended to be drawn towards materials that I could collage together for posters to promote the band, and covers for albums and singles and things. And I very much was drawn to old medical text, a lot of which featured anomalies or children, basically photographs of children or illustrations of children that have been subjected to extreme measures by adults in the medical field, presumably in order to help them, but these looked sort of like strong little kids, trying to overcome the odds, incredible odds, and really being put through the ringer. And I've always been kind of drawn to that strength, and that the sort of outcast, the helpless, the weaker, smaller, overcoming and battling the underdog kind of thing. Anyway, I had found this image. This was sort of a line of rickety little children standing, and I also had this illustration of a radiator by a window, and there were waves of energy coming off the radiator, and so it was sort of this kind of wordplay thing on the idea of radiation, because the children looked sort of impacted, let's say, by the waves of energy coming off the radiator. But the focus of the album was shifted from the radiator and the children to the window. So that was the title of the album, Window, which, is interesting also, I guess, because of, Windows operating systems and Windows like this that I'm looking at you through now on my computer screen, and Windows that we've all been dealing with in 2020 through Zoom and various meetings. Anyway, that's a very long-winded answer to a very quick question. Can you talk about your knitting crochet hobby? Do you have any of your own artwork you can share, and discuss how you got into tarot, and how does the practice support you in deep ways? I discovered crochet through a social group. I was trying to become social and meet people to hang out with, and found a few little groups, that mostly weren't so much technically about crocheting as they were about talking while crocheting. It's easier to open up and share things when you're focused on crafting, as more so than it is in, say, a sort of a group therapy kind of a session. So I discovered crochet, and I really love the idea of crochet, again, as a sort of a minimal art form, whereby you can create objects by pulling a loop through a loop from, one strand of yarn until you've got a whole field of fabric or an object. And I also started attending a men's group of knitters and crocheters and yarn crafters in a yarn store in the village, and I bought my favorite little hook from Furls. It was kind of expensive. It's little, I don't know what kind of wood this is. It's a hard, dark wood. I'm thinking it might be rosewood. It's my favorite hook. And I created a lot of things. Initially, I started creating because of an image that I liked on a favorite children's book. But I also had a bag made of this image. It's also an image used on my Facebook page header. This is, I don't know if you can see this. It's for a poem, and it's an illustration by Garth Williams, who is more famously known for Stuart Little and Charlotte's Web and Little House on the Prairie, that kind of, those series of books. But it was called the Giant Golden Book of Elves and Fairies. I've always been interested in fairy tales, and particularly images relating to kind of pre-Raphaelite, late Victorian era imagery, which I guess goes into the, my love of tarot and the RWS, because it sort of comes out of that period, and you can kind of see influences straggling over from in those images. But anyway, so yeah, I created things like, have a shawl or a throw here that's sort of rainbow colored netting that I made. I sidetracked a little bit. So one of the things I started making when I started doing the crochet were these hats, these pointy elf hats, like some of the figures in the book, the Elves and Fairies book, were wearing. So I have a bunch of these, and actually, if you look back at, I think, my first live video on my channel, I do a walkthrough of a bunch of my hats. I haven't made any of these pointy hats in a while. I had built up quite an inventory to the point where I was selling some of them, and they weren't really selling. So I had a kind of a backlog and got kind of tired of making them. So I started making other things, and so yeah, so these are some of the hats. Then, what else? I made some little bags to carry, eyeglasses or phones in, or tarot cards. I made this one for my Centennial Edition in a tin tarot bag. And I also had made a series of sculptural dolls. I call these my transgender dolls, because they're like little figures, I suppose, kind of almost like fertility goddesses or something, but they're just like, they're bald figures. They look sort of neither male nor female, or combination of both. I just really like them, and I like the shape and the color and the quality of these little figures. So I guess that covers some of the crochet projects. How you got into tarot and how does the practice support you in deep ways? I initially got into tarot because I liked the images in the RWS, but I had trouble deciphering the meanings through the little white book. And then at some point I decided just to not worry about that and start reading the images through symbols in the pictures and colors and directions and connections I had through the actions and the symbols. So then I started collecting them, and I discovered that there were a number of tarot review channels on YouTube because I was looking for new decks, and the stores here wouldn't let you look through the shrink wrap deck, so I needed some way to decide, other than judging a box by its cover, whether I might want to invest money in a whole deck from more than one image. So I discovered that there were all these channels that had walkthroughs. And so then I started building my collection, and I decided, everybody has their own material to share, their own point of view, and, I have one too. So as much as I was gaining from other people's shares, I thought, well, somebody out there is going to like the shares that I have because I'm not sharing a lot of the same things. I really appreciate the channels that share more variety or the more unusual rather than many of the same decks. So if you're out there and you've got some out of print or rare or unusual decks, I encourage you to share them. I will be a big part of your audience, your viewing audience. Let's see. Your interest in tarot began, your collection. Okay, yeah, I talked about that a little bit. How do you like New York City? I like New York City. One of the other reasons I moved here was to not have to be dependent on a car. I had periodic car trouble back when I lived in Pennsylvania, and this was before cell phones. So, if your car broke down, you were basically stranded unless you could find a phone somewhere to phone home or somebody for help, which was very difficult, and I wasn't good at fixing my own car. So I moved away from there to the city so I wouldn't have to depend on cars or be at the mercy of garage mechanics. So that was one thing. Also, there was, a thriving kind of bohemian community of artists and eccentrics here in New York, which, I've always been an outsider. In fact, I've been sort of an outsider on the edge of outsiders. So I haven't even really found a community here. I mean, I'm still kind of an outsider, and I feel very much the outsider even in the tarot community, but here I am. So anyway, I like New York City for that, to that extent, and it's gotten easier and more comfortable the longer I've been here and the longer I've lived in this apartment. I have really reasonable rent as rents go, and although I live in a kind of a dump of an old studio apartment, I jokingly refer to as the bus because it's about 8 by 23 foot long with shelving and collected stuff of 40 years on both sides, with only an aisle, barely walkable aisle down the center of it. So here I am living in the bus. It's in a fourth floor walk up, and that is becoming increasingly difficult over time as I get older. But I do like where I live. I live near Washington Square and the NYU campus in Greenwich Village, and not far. I'm near Bleecker Street, and so yeah, it's sort of the old hippie bohemian village, which hasn't been that since the '60s, but there are some remnants of that have remained the same. Shops and boutiques and cafes, a lot of which are going through strange stuff now with COVID and lots of changes, closing down, changing hands, and so forth. Let's see. I have kind of gotten tired of New York and have felt like I would really like to live in some quiet little community, some little town somewhere. And I've always been kind of obsessed with tiny house living, and I've learned to live and make the most out of the least in a tiny little space. I'm comfortable here, even though I'm in an 8 by 23 foot space. I spend most of my time in less than half of that space. So I don't find myself really needing a lot of space to move around in or do things. I shoot all my videos here on a little pedestal stand, my computer by the side of my bed, or on a little tray on my lap. And these seem to be just fine for all of you out there. I don't know where I would move. If I moved somewhere else outside New York, I would still want to be in a little town where I could get everything I needed on foot and yet not have to walk too far to get it. Maybe have access to a city or more resources within walking distance of home by a train or bus or something. But I haven't found any other communities like that appeal to me. I discovered a few that interested me when I was visiting Europe in my brief travels there. But they're not so much oriented that way in the United States. And just haven't found anywhere better than here. So here I am for now, for better, for worse. What's your favorite meal? That's an odd question. I have a few. I love stuffed cabbage. I like Italian food. I like fried dumplings. I like sloppy joes, burgers, that sort of thing. Do you have any pets? I've had a series of pets, from goldfish to painted turtles to box turtles to a cactus to guinea pigs, cats, and finally 2 dogs. So I kind of worked my way up the evolutionary scale. I had a Cairn Terrier from during the 90s, and then in I guess about late 90s to 2000 I had a Chihuahua, and I lost both of them over time. They had pretty full lives, and I lost my last dog in 2013. I haven't gotten a replacement since. I've been retired on limited income, and also being in a 4th floor walk-up is difficult to maintain a pet's needs. What's your star sign? I'm not sure what the star. My birth sign is Virgo. I don't know. Is that my star sign? I don't know much more about it than that. Do you use crystals? I have crystals. I went through a kind of a crystal phase in the 80s. I've got a number of them. I should show you some. I didn't really prepare. Maybe I can grab a couple. Let's see. Oh. Well, this is one of my favorites. This is a citrine. I think this was the first kind of expensive crystal I bought. It's highly polished, and it turns out appropriate that I was drawn to this because I have health issues around my solar plexus. So that's my citrine, and I also have an amethyst. Big chunk of amethyst, and here's an obsidian sphere, and many more, but I'm not going to drag them all out now. Maybe at some point I'll do a crystal walkthrough. I sometimes use them to hold and meditate. I used one during a past life regression workshop I went to, and that seemed to be profitable, yielded some interesting results. Okay, somebody here asking about the channel, my band Dark Day, and the No Wave scene. I think I sort of covered that. What made you stop with Dark Day? I haven't entirely stopped, but the music scene changed. It went from vinyl to cassettes and sort of do-it-yourself stuff to compact discs, and now they're gone, and then into streaming and back to vinyl again now. And it's not really product oriented anymore. I like the idea of being able to hold a vinyl record or a CD in your hand and look at the artwork, and that's really not so much the case anymore. All the shops are gone. Everything is downloadable and streamable, and also there's not that much interest. I haven't been offered, or approached by labels with offers to release material or create material. So it's a lack of interest on the part of an audience that kind of slowed down my output of music. I did manage to secure releases by several small labels, but most of them paid little to nothing, and after one release didn't really want more. I still have a wide collection of instruments that I don't really record with anymore. I mean, once in a blue moon I'll make a little YouTube video on my name channel with little 1 minute concerts or performance of songs on ukulele or harp, or lyre. And I have that array of instruments around my bed and just sort of reach for them and just sort of use them therapeutically when I meditate and improvise. So yeah, I haven't entirely stopped with Dark Day, but I haven't made anything with Dark Day in a few years. So the potential is still there, but the drive and the opportunity isn't. Also, originally I started off working with other musicians, and that was a great compromise to get what I wanted sound-wise. It wasn't until multi-track recording and working with computer programs to be able to create music myself that I was able to get what I wanted by doing it all, doing all the parts myself. So anyway, how do you define yourself spiritually? I don't really have a definition. My approach to, and also here's another one, what are your spiritual or religious beliefs? They're not in any organized religion. I do have spiritual ideas and beliefs. I'm not sure I should share them. I think that kind of thing really should be kept more private and personal between the individual and who or what they worship. I'm not part of any group, although I would say that my spirituality is born of a cross between science and metaphysics. And you look in a microscope and you look in a telescope, and what comes between those extremes or takes all of those into one thing in terms of science and energy and moving bodies, energy flow and so forth. All that impacts my beliefs and my spirituality. Let's see. Watching your videos, I understand your interest in tarot started in the late 60s and early 70s. Have you been reading, collecting continually since then, or were there periods you tuned out? Yeah, I bought a deck or two in the late 70s, early 80s. Didn't really collect any for a while. Bought a few more maybe in the late 90s or 2000s, and have bought a lot since my channel started. I don't know how many I have. I would estimate maybe about 100 decks now, but I haven't counted in a while. Last time I counted it was 60, and I'm sure it's at least 20 or 40 more than that by now. I also need to sort of weed out a few of those, because as I told you, I live in a small space and I'm running out of storage space, so yeah, I need to get rid of some in order to make room for more. Weed out the old, make room for the new. Something lighter. What was your favorite Sid and Marty Krofft TV show, if you remember? I don't know where that's coming from. As I recall, their shows, like, was it H.R. Pufnstuf and things like that? Were they part of the Banana Splits and things? I mean, I was already a little bit too old for that kind of thing during the Saturday morning cartoon lineup, so I wasn't really drawn into that stuff. My favorites in terms of cartoons were more earlier, back in the 60s, things like Astro Boy. I was a big fan of that. How does your love of music and your musical ability affect your interaction with the cards? Do the cards sing to you? I guess I'm asking, do you have synesthesia or similar experience? The reason I ask is my brother was a musician. He said he heard the cards sing, like when he played music. He saw it in color. That's from Nancy, Texas Rose. No, I don't hear my cards sing. I don't hear music when I look at the images. The images do speak to me. I do kind of like relate to the symbolism a little bit more if I kind of tune out or phase out a little bit, kind of blur my senses a little bit, and just kind of take in the symbols and the imagery and the cards. Sometimes if you focus too hard on the cards, the messages don't come through. Sometimes if you're in a little bit more of a daydreamy, passive mode, you communicate better. That's similar with the experience of shamanic journeying. I also occasionally partake in a group of shamans where we do trance work and meditation and shamanic journeying. So, have you had any paranormal experiences? Yeah, I mean, well, I related this in an earlier video that you can look through. I've seen UFOs on 2 occasions, and there's an unexplained encounter from my childhood when I was about 3 or 4 that I don't know what to make of. It definitely seemed paranormal to me. I witnessed a being outside my bedroom window that seemed like it was a wildlife creature that should not have been able to be in the enclosed area, a fenced-in area outside my window. There was no way for a large creature to get in that area. And I read in various paranormal books that sometimes extraterrestrials can mask their identities in terms of how we see them, like shapeshifters. They can, through mind control or whatever, present themselves as familiar images rather than alien images. So I often wonder if what I saw was not a wilderness creature that had no existence in that part of the country, to perhaps an extraterrestrial. I don't know. I did do a past life regression at one point, and considered it was a group thing. I did consider doing it again privately in order to uncover more memories of that particular encounter, but I'm less than trusting of the hypnotherapist, and also a little bit afraid of what kinds of answers I might get through pursuing that. Does anyone else in your family use tarot? No. Have you ever used a Ouija board? My grandmother gifted my sister and I a Ouija board when we were pre-teens, and we played with it a few times, and remember getting much in the way of results, but it was intriguing. It was during the era when this television personality Kreskin also released a series of ESP cards. Some of you might remember those. How many decks do you now have in total? I don't really know. Like I said, I think about 100. Can you tell about the figures you have displayed on your shelf wall behind you? Oh, well, you probably can't see them very well, but this is, I refer to as my orphanage. Again, back to that image of children. I used to go to a flea market group, and friends of mine would collect various things in flea markets, and I thought, well, they all have collections. I should have a collection. This was back in the 80s. And I found this little porcelain standalone figure. I don't know whether you'd just call it a statuette or a doll, because it didn't have any moving parts. Its, arms and legs were, positioned together with no space. So it was just like a solid monolithic tiny figure. And I liked the expression on it that looked sort of like this kind of victim look in its eyes, like that it was all alone in the world, sort of this forlorn quality. So I bought it, and then I started discovering more and more that there were many series of these little figures. Apparently they were dime dolls, painted porcelain that used to be handed out or given as prizes or gifts at carnivals and fairs and so forth. So I started collecting those. My dad, who was into woodworking, built this unit for me, a display unit. And so they're in there. I call that my orphanage. What section of New York City do you live in? Greenwich Village. That's from Jilly. Zen, Little Zen Crone Tarot. Sorry. Favorite museum. Actually, my favorite museum isn't in New York. Sometimes I go on road trips with my friend Linda from Baltimore. She has a car and still drives, and we've checked out various places through the Northeast, sort of in anticipation of me finding some other town I might want to move to, but I haven't yet. But anyway, during our travels, during our last travel, we went to Princeton, and I fell in love with the Princeton Art Museum. So I think that's probably, to date, my favorite art museum. It has a wide array of primitive and modern art, as well as lots of things from the all the eras of art, from, like I said, from primitive and native cultures, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, right on up through the, Pre-Raphaelites, Impressionists, Surrealists, contemporary modern art, and it's free. You can donate to get in. It's a beautiful little museum in the center of their campus. Favorite place to walk. So I don't do a whole lot, not as much walking as I should in the city. I live near Washington Square Park, so, strolling through there is okay, I guess. There's a little park around the corner from me. It's sort of a private park that has a weeping willow tree and a lovely garden, and I like to sit there under the willow tree. That's a favorite. Favorite takeout food. Not a whole lot of things. Pizza, falafel, Chinese. I don't know that I have a particular favorite. Sandwiches. Let's see. Looks like that's about it. Another question about my music days, but I kind of covered that. Where I'm from, family, and what's one of your most joyful moments? Oof. Gee, I don't know. My family's from Dayton, Ohio. My parents were both into the arts. They met in art school. My father studied calligraphy. My mother was more into crafting. Neither one of them made much of a career of it. Actually, my dad did make a career of calligraphy until things became computerized, and that just sort of like ended that, his, commercial art period. So they were very encouraging to me when I pursued art as a child and on through my school years. And moving to New York City, although I'm not sure they knew what to make of my interest in minimalism and performance and conceptual art, but my most joyful moment, oh dear. That's a really tough one, and I can't think of too many. I can't think of a most joyful moment. Something that springs to mind, I was visiting a friend that had a home in upstate New York, and he had a screened-in porch and with recliners and sofa beds and things on the porch. I remember an autumn day, a very windy autumn day, when I was napping under a blanket with my pet chihuahua by my side and just sort of listening to the wind rustling through the pine needles on the trees in this most glorious music. And that was a very joyful moment. I actually love the sound of wind and thunder, and I like watching the snow come down. I particularly am now into watching bushcrafting videos, and I like videos that depict people with limited resources making homes out of sticks and stones and living with very little to their name, and how they craft or make an art out of their lives living in little homes that they've and shelters they built in the woods. You know, I guess that brings me back to that affinity with elves and fairies and fairy tales and the idea of living in a tiny home or living in a hollow tree somewhere or something, a little cottage. So many different pipe dream homes I would have loved to have had a chance to live in. Tree houses, like I said, thatch roof cottages, tiny houses. I probably could afford to buy myself a tiny home now that I'm retired and I've inherited a little family money. But the problem is that the zoning isn't good for any of the places that I feel like I'd like to live in the Northeast. I would really like I said, to live in a little town on a very tiny little patch of land where I can have a walled-in or fenced-in small garden or small yard and tiny house. And but I really would like to live in, I think I would really like to live in Munchkin land. I would like to live in a little village of like-minded individuals in tiny homes. And the only places I know like that, there are a few, I suppose, in the Northwest, and I don't really want to live on the West Coast or the Northwest. So here I am for now, and I guess I've been on here blathering for long enough. So I hope that tells you a little bit of something about me, and I look forward to continuing sharing tarot decks and other kinds of things with you in the future. Well, that couldn't wait till I stopped recording, could it? Pardon me. I'll see you all soon.